All right, I'm going to keep my eye on people joining, but we'll go ahead and get started so you guys don't have to sit here and stare at me and wait. So what I'd like to do first of all is get this off the screen because I'm supposed to be up here. All right. So this is recording. I think everybody already knows that. First of all, I'm Kelly Kindle. If you don't already know me, I'm the CEO and president here at KNC Strategic Services, CMMC certified assessor, and leading our CMMC efforts. And this is our monthly webinar. This month, though, we're doing it a little bit different. Something we've done in the past, which we've always found fun to do, is more of a panel approach. And we've got a fantastic panel now of official assessors that are part of our CMMC C3PO assessment team, and also some of our guru experts. So really good panel put together for you today. We're going to be talking about the CMMC assessment process, what to expect, some tips, some ideas, and we'll see where it goes from there. And then we'll have an open QA as well. So I like to call it Ask an Assessor. So if you have questions at any time, one, feel free. If you have a question, you can throw it into the chat, and I will try to keep an eye on that as well. If you have something you want to wait and ask later on, then you'll be able to unmute yourself and ask your question live. We are good either way. So if you do have questions throughout, like I said, throw them into the chat. I'll keep an eye on that. But otherwise, we will get moving forward. So first of all, I think from seeing the list of everybody that's joined so far, I'm pretty confident that you all know who we are. So I don't want to sit here and read off the screen, but there's some key things that we always want to make sure everybody understands about us. And there's also something that's really unique right now that pertains to this conversation, which is, as of yesterday, I didn't check today, but as of yesterday, we are literally the only authorized C3PO in the entire Pacific time zone. Possibly the Hawaiian time zone. I'm not sure what it's actually called, but we're the official C3PO of the state of Hawaii. If you don't know that already, we have 4 Hawaiian clients already on board for assessments. So I think we can say we're official to Hawaii. So one that just really surprises me, there's about 18 C3POs that were authorized that are either getting reauthorized or maybe not. We don't know. But as of yesterday, we are the only one in the entire Pacific time zone, which blows my mind. So I guess good for us. That's exciting. Excellent team that we've built up a awesome bench, I guess you could say, of assessors, some that will be on this. And if you can't tell already, we are very patriotic focused and veteran focused. It's kind of a theme if you can't already tell. So that's a little bit about KNC. I really want to rush through this to try to get to what we really are here to talk about. So someone can't get on the webinar, they're calling me. This is all about the assessment process. Like I said, what to expect. We really want to give you guys as much understanding of what the assessment is like, what you're going to experience. And these are all the typical questions we get when we have a company coming to us talking about scheduling and getting engaged to get their assessment done. These are the questions that come up every single time. So what I'm going to do first is just talk through these a little bit, and then we'll get to the panel. I will go quickly through this so we can get to it. But what I want to say for us is to engage with us or any C3PO, the process is pretty straightforward. When you contact us, phone, email, whatever, we have a questionnaire that we send out to you. It's a 3-page fillable PDF. It's very easy, but it gives us all of the information we need to be able to create a firm fixed price proposal. Everything we do is a fixed price. We're not adding on extras on top of it. It's very, very straightforward. You have an assessment cost. If there is travel, which I'm surprised by, but mentioning Hawaii. So if it's some kind of a location where we have to fly myself or some other assessor out to, we break out and we show you the travel costs and we just fix that. If it ends up costing more, oh well, that'll be out of our pocket, if you will. So firm fixed price proposal, we send that back to you and you have a chance to review basically the details of the agreement. Once it's signed and sent back, then we will send you, I should say, first of all, an NDA is always done. It's kind of a no-brainer, but I should have mentioned it. So we sign an NDA before anything gets done, more than happy to. But then after that agreement's done, we have our contract, the actual terms for the assessment. We send that out, that's signed, and you're done. Depending on, kind of jumping into the second part of this, is scheduling. Everybody's wondering about the scheduling and availability. And some people are hearing from C3POs that they're totally booked, or they're booked all the way until X month. We're doing things a little bit differently here, intentionally, because we are trying to build as many assessment teams as we need to meet the demand versus have a team and just say we're full for the year. So right now we have a lot of flexibility because of that. We don't have, surprisingly, we have nobody for a January assessment. I really truly thought that it was going to be a lot of companies chomping at the bit to be the first out the gate. And I and others have been surprised. It's really been more of a April to July is what the majority of the people we've already scheduled have selected. A couple for February, a couple for March, but mostly in that summer time frame. So for us, scheduling right now is very easy. And the way we do it is we ask you just to pick a month and let us know what month you would like to be assessed. As we get closer to that month, then we will work out what the exact start date is, which is the kickoff meeting, what will be the official start of the assessment, and what week will it start. That way we can kind of balance the availability of people, other clients that are getting assessed in the same month, and just balance everything appropriately to try to take care of everybody. Assessment cost, we always get asked this, is always one of the biggest questions, of course. And just to make it a down and dirty, very quick question, we base our costs off the assessment scope. I was in a long LinkedIn conversation with some people yesterday complaining about costs and saying the costs are going to be 100,000 plus. And so I went on there and was trying to educate that really, no, it doesn't matter the size of the company. We do it based on the assessment scope. I assume other C3POs are probably doing the same thing, but for us, for sure, what assessment scope? Is it a small enclave, a small enterprise, a small business, small amount of people, small, everything? That's the typical that we're seeing. If there's a medium, we've had a couple come to us. We haven't had any what we would consider large, which would be probably like a large prime. We don't have Lockheed Martin, being down our door saying, come assess us. So the majority of what we expect to do is in that small assessment scope category. And the pricing right now, if you would have asked me 2 or 3 months ago, you would have heard a bigger range, but a different starting point for sure. The low end of the range came up because of the final rule and the requirements for the minimum amount of assessors to be on a team. So right now, a small assessment scope is ranging somewhere between about 40,000 and 55,000 for the entire assessment, including travel, because we've done several where we've quoted travel. A medium assessment scope, if we had to do them, probably is going to be in the 55 to 75 range. And a large, again, we're not getting into them, but just to give a ballpark, probably in the 75 to 100 range. That's based on what we have quoted and what I'm also hearing back from prospects that we're talking to, hearing what they've been quoted by other C3POs. So that gives you a ballpark idea of what cost is. And then the time frame, it's really simple. It's about a 6 to 7 week process after all of the contractual and all that fun stuff's taken care of. The actual assessment is essentially over a 6 to 7 week period. It starts out with a readiness assessment, kickoff meeting, readiness assessment, where we are trying to determine if we have the confidence level that the OSC is ready to go, that they will be ready for the assessment. And there's certain things we check. We are looking at the SSP, but we're not evaluating it for adequacy and sufficiency like we do in an assessment. We're just looking at it, trying to make sure, okay, your SSP is not 10 pages long. And that's kind of an inside joke, but we've seen some that have come through that way. We're trying to make sure that you've got the people arranged, that you're ready to go and ready to start the assessment, not whether you could pass or not, just ready to go for the assessment. So that's about 6 to 7 weeks out. you have really 2 weeks that matter. You have the documentation review week, and then you have the interview week. Documentation review week, straightforward. You've sent us everything that you possibly have as far as documents, artifacts, policies, procedures, plans, everything that you have. One, have it organized, and then two, you send it to us before the start of documentation review week. In that week, then we are digging through everything. So we're trying to determine as much as we can that we can eliminate from the assessment requirements, saying, okay, I've already seen this in the documentation, check, 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 get rid of as much as we can. That way, once we get to interview week, all we're focused on is literally doing the interviews, demonstrations, okay, you send in a screenshot, let's verify the screenshot live, let's see it. That's what we're going to be doing. So that's short and sweet on the overall what to expect and the time frame. So again, I wanted to give that just kind of a setting the foundation, if you will, for this webinar, but also for this conversation. So what I'd like to do is talk about the panel members that are on here. For the sake of time, you already know who I am. I'm typically the one that runs the webinars, but I'm not a one-man show. I have a business partner, as you can see on here. Chuck is my business partner and great friend, and we've been doing this now for, holy cow, today's the actual day, 7 years as of today for our anniversary. That's crazy. So Chuck's going to be on here acting as the moderator for the panel, and then two of our assessors that are part of our team, Lamar Clapham and Nikki Berger. Nikki and I worked together on a joint surveillance voluntary assessment about roughly 2 months ago. And then we have, as I mentioned earlier, our CMMC guru, Mr. Newborn. He worked for the Defense Acquisition University and was in the government for many, 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 many years. And recently retired and ditched us out of San Diego and went all the way to the other side of the country, abandoned us. I'm kidding. He had a great retirement. So he's one of our secret sauce. He's an advisor to us, a consultant for us, and a great friend as well. So Chuck, if you are ready to come off mute, I'm not able to see everybody that well right now to see if you guys are on mute or not. But Chuck, if you want to speak a little bit and then get us into the panel questions.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelly. And I just want to extend our appreciation for all the attendees today. We know your time is very important, and we hope you get some value out of this conversation we're about to have. So thank you, everyone, for attending. As a moderator, I'm going to run this like the presidential election. Every candidate will have 3 seconds to speak, and the other candidates will have 3 minutes to refute them. No, I'm just joking. First of all, we've got a list of questions that Kelly and I keep getting asked over and over by many prospects and clients about CMMC. So we're going to go through some of those highlights as our questions today. If you have any specific question you want to ask, at any time, put something in the chat, raise your hand, and we're going to be leaving plenty of time at the end of this webinar for questions and answers. We really like to have some collaborative, so please don't be shy, come off mute, send us a chat, send us a text, whatever. We want to make sure that your questions are answered and that this time again is valuable to you. Kelly did the introductions, but before we get into it, let's do it again. Lamar, do you just want to say hello so people know your voice and your face, please?
Hi, how's everyone doing? I'm Lamar Clapham.
And Nikki, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nikki Berger.
Thank you. And Chris.
Yeah, Happy New Year. And this is Chris Newborn, and glad that you are participating in this event.
All right, I think we'll start out just going from left to right. We'll start with Lamar. First question. Lamar, please share briefly what your experience on assessments has been, if any.
So up to this point, we've been doing a lot of gap assessments. So OSC's prepping to do audits, which haven't happened yet, but a lot of that work has just been primarily gap assessments. So we have done many smaller companies, small to medium companies. Actually, the medium companies are a little harder to do, but the smaller companies have consulted us to go through and look at what they've implemented that has been a wonderful adventure to this point, and helping them get the language of CMMC together has also been the really great point as far as experience with assessments.
Excellent. Nikki, I'll ask you the same question, please. I know you've worked on a joint surveillance. What's your experience been on assessments?
Yeah, my experience, I've worked on, I believe, 3 joint surveillance, led one and supported 2 others. And then similar to Lamar, supported doing gap assessments or even, assessment, readiness, where we're not necessarily going through and assessing all of the controls, but really just working with the OSCs to make sure holistically that they're prepared for the assessment process.
Very good, and allow Chris a chance to speak. Chris, any comments from the assessment perspective from the role becoming active and your experience in all the years preparing for this launch?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a challenging period now. It seemed like I've been working this since 2017, 2018, and it's been going up and down in regards to the government trying to move out to implement and execute the statutory regulatory requirements. And for once, we finally have the infrastructure in regards to the Rule 32. Now, everybody's been waiting for 48, the same as for me, in regards to how it's going to be implemented and executed from a contractual standpoint. And I think that, we need to have a lot of patience because this is where the government is going to put in writing to say how they're going to evaluate the implementation of the CMMC. And what I mean by that is it going to be done? Is CMMC going to be activated through a contractual mechanism, which everybody is assuming and perceiving to do that? And then if that is so, then is it going to be one CMMC certification take care of the contract, or is that CMMC certification going to take care of several of the contractors who are trying to execute their contractual obligations? So, again, you have the assessment in regards to the infrastructure of the CMMC AB as well as the C3 PAOs. And then you have the other side in regards to the government writing the contract and doing a contractual mean, as well as everything supported by a business plan. So it's very exciting. Hopefully this gets kicked off officially sometime in the summer, where you actually have contracts that have the CMMC requirement and you see everything come together. Over.
Thank you, Chris. We're looking forward to getting a little more your insight on the contractual requirements during this webinar. Lamar, I'm going to ask you, Nikki, and Kelly the same question, because you guys have a wealth of experience and relevant experience for this call. What common issues, Lamar, have you seen during your gap assessments and working with clients already? Is there any consistency you're seeing in difficulties or challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hoping this is the same thing that Nikki saw on JVSAs, but interpretation of the language, I think, is very important. So interpreting a practice or control or requirement and then implementing that, I think, is the piece that I've seen the most of. So an example of that would be someone believes that this particular control pertains to this, and while it might, they don't really understand that the organizational actions behind it or the assessment objectives behind it require additional things. And so that's the one piece that I've seen the most. So they'll look at the top level practice and say, okay, I have access control put together, but they're not actually looking at the assessment objectives, all the different layers below that, to make sure that they've got it covered. And so that's just a learning phase. And once they understand that piece, they pick up pretty quick. But that's the one common thing I see mostly when doing gap assessments.
Kelly, is that your perspective also?
I would say that that is absolutely true. 100% agree. I think it's the preparation too. Just to add on to that is the being ready and organized and not running around like a chicken with your head cut off right before the assessment starts and panicking, which I've seen on both sides. So it's very vital that you've got all of your documentation properly organized. You know stuff where everything is, not just for the sake of the assessor and trying to lead them to your evidence, but for yourself, because whoever's leading your assessment and being on the call the majority of the time, they're responsible. They're bringing up all the evidence. And so if you're having a hard time finding stuff yourself, you're just going to make it a lot harder. So the more organized you are, the more organized all of your evidence is, whether it's in the GRC application, whether it's just in a SharePoint site, whether it's in a folder, whatever, organized. That's one thing I've seen has been a big challenge.
Thank you, Kelly. And Nikki, do you have any tips that can help an OSC be more prepared for an assessment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think kind of piggybacking on what the common issues that Kelly and Lamar spoke to, I would say to step back and evaluate your SSP. Now, your SSP is not expected to stand alone. We will look at your policies and procedures, but if we read your SSP and we can't gauge what exactly you're doing to support that requirement, that presents a challenge for us. So I would say to look at your SSP with that lens of answering the question of not just what, but the how. So instead of, for example, saying, the organization restricts physical access to facilities to authorized personnel, like, okay, that's that's sort of restating the objective. We would expect to see more of something along the lines of, access to our building is restricted by key cards, and visitors must log entrance or something to that effect. It doesn't have to go into all of the detail of what system you're using for key cards and that kind of thing, but I should have a good idea of how you're executing on a specific objective. And then the second thing that I would mention, if I'm allowed, is just to Kelly's point about panicking. And I've been on both sides of the audit table, so I would say just remember, for the most part, I can't speak for all assessors. We're not here to kind of get you. That's not our goal. We're really here to walk through the process, make sure we understand what you're doing, and that it meets the requirements of CMMC. So to that end, anything you can do to better prepare yourself to speak to your organization, how you're meeting it, and pulling up the evidence, that's where I think organizations can make the most improvement. And I think it results in less stress for themselves and probably for us too. So I went over my 30 seconds, sorry.
No, that was just joking. Please, and all your words are very insightful and appreciated. Lamar, let me turn it over to you. What would be the most important thing an OSC could do to be ready for the document review and interview weeks?
So I kind of I combine the two. So what Nikki was just talking about and this particular question here, um, I think there's a really important piece of this puzzle, and we've been doing that. And actually, Kelly's the one who kind of triggered me to do that. So a while back, I sat through one of the webinars, and Kelly had made some comments about how organized you had to be and do certain things in his assessment. Right, he went through and said the things that were difficult for the team to get assessed. And there are clients that now we've asked them to do essentially a mock assessment instead of just burning through the practices and saying, yep, we're good to go, everything's good. Actually try to do a mock assessment and actually walk through each practice, take the assessment guide, look at some of the things that the assessors can use in the assessment guide or the recommendations, and see if what you're actually doing aligns with some of that. And then make sure that each artifact that you have actually is real. So like Kelly had made the comment, make sure you can find your evidence. That is much more difficult in my experience than it appears. So doing a mock assessment, walking through the evidence, looking at each practice, doing what Nikki just mentioned is, hey, do I really explain in my SSP how we do that? Or is it just a statement that says, yeah, we do access control, right? And then during that, the piece, so having all of that mock assessment done, I think that really preps you up to have your documentation in line. And then I think from that aspect too, as an OSC, you know who the people are who are going to be the interviewed people. So the people that implement the policies and procedures. So you walk through that as a mock assessment, and you're very aware of where the problems could potentially lie in your document review or in your interview time. So I think if I just sum it all up, I think doing a mock assessment and really walking through each control, procedure, policy, all of those things, make sure you have everything organized, would be the biggest benefit for both your document review and for your interview time.
That makes a lot of sense. It even comes off professional. So the assessor, if they appear to see an organization disorganized, not available to find any information, they're already making subjective comments, thinking they're not ready yet. Couldn't have a question for Chris. Chris, based on Lamar's comment around OSCs interpreting the NIST requirements and then Nikki's comments around the SSP, from your experience in your sector, what's your recommendation or solution for that? Because some of those requirements do get sophisticated and complicated, and sometimes people just glaze over them. Do you have any recommendations in terms of the interpretation? Is it through hiring a consultant? Is it through what are some of your recommendations?
I think the challenge when I first got involved with this back in 2017, 2018 was there was some preconceived things that I thought industry and government should be doing. And it was the challenge of saying, okay, I don't have any wireless access. Okay, why don't you have any wireless access? And actually going through and looking at all the connections, understanding your architect. And what we found out was that number one, most of the organizations, whether it's government or industry, doesn't know their architect. Number two, don't know their contractual obligations in regards to what they signed up for and what they're meeting. So, for instance, there would be 3 or 4 departments that would be doing something, and there would be another department completely in isolation that didn't understand that they were violating some of the standard operating procedures in regards to providing a wireless. So just for bringing a wireless laptop in the environment and using it and not letting anybody else know. So I think that the biggest thing is organizations not understanding what they're doing from a contractual standpoint, understanding their capabilities, understanding their responsibilities. Number two, understanding their partnerships, or what I call service level agreements, in regards to their contractual responsibility, subcontractor, manufacturing, vendors. And then the next thing is understanding who has what responsibility. So all these are easily reflected in a security plan, but when you look at it again, for me, from a confidential CIA perspective, and running through every one of those and challenging yourself, then you start getting a true understanding of not only what your company is doing, but the obligations that your company has signed off to meet your contractor, subcontractor, manufacturer, vendor responsibilities. And then again, looking at that to see how that is implemented and executed through policy and procedures. So again, I think it's a self-awareness that a lot of companies, and again, including industry as well as government, don't understand what they're doing. And when they do that mock assessment, that brings out a lot of things. And then when they actually get to an assessment, that's also going to bring out some awareness that was not thought of, but that was based on some other assessments that were done by other companies, whether they're large, medium, or small. Over.
Thank you, Chris. We're going to be opening up to questions and answers from our attendees, but before I do that, I'd like to do one more roundtable and go around to all the panelists and ask them if they have any further comments to make based on the questions I've asked or what they've heard some of the other panelists speak to. Lamar, do you have any additional comments you'd like to say to the team? Oh, sorry, Lamar, you might be on mute or.
I'm on mute. Thank you. It's a cybersecurity technical difficulty. I'm going to piggyback on what I was saying as mock assessment. I think that a lot of places go through a lot of OSCs go through the process, but when they get to the end, they don't know what to do. And I've seen that multiple times, that they start to go down the process, they think they're done, and then you ask them just a couple quick questions, and they realize, well, maybe we don't have that. So I think that mock assessment is something that, one, can save companies money, and two, can help reassure them when they really pull the trigger to go get assessed. I think that's very important.
Excellent advice. Nikki, do you have any points you'd like to reemphasize or any comments based on some of the other comments you've heard now from the panelists?
I think I'll start with just saying that I think it's clear that, you know, we've touched on what we're seeing that really is common, because all of the things that both Kelly and Lamar spoke to, I kind of have in my notes. I had to double check. Did I share my notes with them beforehand? But yes, 100%. And just to reiterate on the mock assessments, because again, not only for the perspective of being able to pull up your evidence, we see that a lot. I don't know how often, you know, tools or the navigation within the tools are changing, but on every JSVA that I did, when they would bring an admin in to pull up something from Azure or Entra ID, they couldn't find it, and they're digging and pulling up guidance online. So I don't know if that speaks to the process recently changed, or perhaps they really didn't have a good gauge of how that evidence was pulled. Did someone else pull it for them? Perhaps, maybe. So I think going through a mock audit, whether it's something you sort of facilitate internally or use a third party for, is beneficial, because it prepares you to be able to answer those questions, as well as, can you also pull up the evidence? Because it's great to provide us with that body of evidence, but there are some things that we will want to see live, you know, in the moment. And if I'm being fully transparent, I think at times when we see people struggle with that, it makes you question, you know, am I speaking to the right person? Do they really understand how this is set up? So I think the more you can prepare yourselves, the better it is for your team, and the more streamlined and efficient the process can run.
Nikki, thank you. That sounds terrific. I'll ask the same question of Kelly and to Chris, and then we'll open it up to Q&A from the attendees. Kelly, is there any additional point you want to really emphasize or comment onto one of the other panelists' discussions here?
Yeah, I want to kind of echo what Nikki was saying about, we were on an assessment together, and there was a challenge with the OSC where they had to bring in somebody from a certain department, and they were going to be doing the demonstration, and it just created a whole lot of challenges. So what I would recommend is know who's going to be responsible for each section and have them ready, because the time of when you think something's going to happen, even based on the schedule we put out for the assessment, it never works out the exact same. It might go faster. A lot of times it goes faster. So if you think, oh, you know, we get this guy from whatever department, he'll be there, we'll probably talk to him at 1 o'clock, and all of a sudden it's 11:30 and we're like, okay, we need that guy. And oh, he's not available. Oh, he's out on lunch, you know, whatever. Whoever you're going to have that's going to be responsible, if they're not going to be on the assessment the entire time, make sure they're ready to roll at a given notice, because we may change around the structure of the way we're going through the assessments, or things go faster, anything like that happen. And then the other thing I was thinking about, I can't remember what you triggered it earlier in my head, but I've been thinking about it the whole time so I wouldn't forget, but not applicable and out of scope. I want to make a comment about both of those. Out of scope does not mean out of the assessment. And not applicable doesn't mean not askable. Okay, I've been thinking of that the whole time, trying to come up with what to say. What I mean is, out of scope, it doesn't mean you put out of scope and it's gone and we don't deal with it. If you say something's out of scope, one, you still have to diagram it, have it on your diagram and show it on your diagram as an asset, have it in your asset inventory, list it as out of scope, and then be able to explain to the assessor why it's out of scope. It could be very easy. It's a lot, physical separation, da da da. Okay, cool. But you need to show that. And then for the not applicables, just because you say you don't do something doesn't mean you put it not applicable and we don't ask about it. If it's not applicable, you have to show the justification of why it's not applicable. And we as assessors read that, discuss that with you, and have to agree with you on it. So if you say something's not applicable, just know it doesn't mean we're going to skip over it. It means we're going to ask a lot of questions about it to make sure we understand why you're saying it's not applicable. It might be something very simple. We don't do software development. Okay, not applicable on the software development one. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. But there are a lot of them in there that some people put not applicable. It may not be. So one, be careful what you label as not applicable and just make sure it's defendable. Make sure you have your explanation ready of why you're saying it's not applicable. I think I'll leave it there.
That is, for the benefit of everyone on the call here, that is great insight you're getting from all the panelists. You're getting real world experience. They've been on the front lines. They've been working with the organization seeking certifications. Chris, I'll have one more question to you, then we'll open it up to the Q&A. Chris, is there any comment you'd like to reemphasize or anything you've heard from the panelists that you kind of want to piggyback onto or discuss a little further?
No, I think the rest of the panel, especially what Kelly was talking about, when you say out of scope but not applicable, I think that's another major thing there that people, or they put a label on and they don't have to justify. I think I've designed these assessments, through policy and procedures. And one of the tests is to actually ask the question, say, well, okay, why is this not applicable? And if the OSC doesn't have a good response, then as an assessor, you start doubting the other things that they have stated as non-applicable or that are out of scope. So again, you have to have an answer and a response, whether it's in scope, out of scope, and you have to take a look at the totality of the architect. So, again, the whole thing is to safeguard, the information, whether it's government or it's your own proprietary, and you have to be ready to defend that on somebody who's assessing and trying to understand your system and your associated policy and procedures. Over.
Thank you, Chris. Nikki just posted an additional tip. Nikki, do you want to explain that, please?
Sure. Yeah, I was just going to say one last tip is that the DIPCAC has published, I think it was in 2023, their list of top 10 other than satisfied requirements or practices based on their NIST 800 DIPCAC high assessment. So I think that's a good resource for OSCs to look at because it identifies common failures that they've seen consistently. And so you could evaluate that to make sure you're not in that same boat.
Well, very interesting. Thank you. I'm looking down the participants list, and we have our special guests are John, Brian, and Burge. Please, this is meant to be collaborative. We're going to open up to Q&A. Please raise your hand, post something in chat, or just come off mute and ask the question. But we have one now posted from David Krishek. David, I don't want to just read that. If you want to go ahead and just come off mute and ask the question, and we'll open it up to whichever panelist wants to answer that first.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Chuck. So I've been in the space for a few years myself. I'm an RPA. I also come from an ISO background, and early on, some of the smaller engineering specific companies that I was working with, who maybe had one or two contracts in the DoD space, were really hard pressed to justify the cost of getting into alignment and then going through an assessment, And so, they're actually making the decision to just walk away from their contracts. And so there's this real pay to play perception that small engineering companies, or, a little mom and pop machine shop that makes the spring that goes at the bottom of the whip antenna for a Humvee. And they have, that's maybe 5 to 10 to 20% of their revenue off of that contract. And they're just saying, I can't justify it. So what are your thoughts on that? What can the cyber AB, or what can the DIBCAC and the community and government be doing to help these small organizations bridge that gap?
That's a very good question. It gets into the overall cost of implementing CMMC compliance. Unless someone wants to jump in first, I'll just go through the list. Maybe Nikki, do you have any insight on that? Or Lamar?
No, I don't. That would be a little bit out of my purview.
Okay. Lamar, any thoughts on that?
So I've definitely seen this, so I can reiterate what David has said. There's some companies, even that are larger companies, that only have a small segment of their work that's DoD work, and they pull away and say we're not going to do that. The only thing that I can say is that you can be creative in the way that you approach this to limit your costs. It's still going to be an expense, but it doesn't mean that you have to go do, $100,000 solution if you're a small mom and pop.
Mm-hmm.
There's ways to do it, and potentially talking to your primes, maybe your primes can help you. So those are kind of, I do hear that all the time, that it's super expensive and people are like, oh, it's not worth it to me. But you might be worth it to your prime. So I think it would behoove those to be creative, be open and discuss it with their primes, and try to find solutions rather than just kind of give up on it.
Yeah, I'd like to echo on that, in that, first of all, it comes down to, it's a business decision, of course. So if you're only doing 1% of your business in the DoD and you just don't want to, and you'd rather walk away and save that money, completely understandable business decision. I think it comes down to, not so much how many contracts you have or how many subcontracts you have, more about how much revenue, what percentage of revenue in your company is your DoD work, and how much do you want it to be in the future? If you're only 5% right now, but you're starting to make a really big push because it used to only be 1 and you're hoping you're going to get to 25, okay, then makes more sense to, put the investment in. But if it's just minuscule and you're just don't care enough to put that much money towards something that's that little of revenue for you, then that makes sense. And I think that is happening on some of the smaller ones, and I don't mean small business size, I mean smaller revenue size, that, hey, we're only making 100,000 from working with the DoD and we're a $60 million company, so we don't really care. But it's also about future work too, is, yeah, you might only be doing a certain amount now, but in 6 months, as this all shakes out, that could change, and that prime that you've been working with may now have more business for you for that exact same reason of other companies pulling out. So it's also kind of an opportunity cost you have to look at, is, okay, well, do I want to put the investment in now so I can be ready in case something comes my way as well? So I think that's part of the justification. You mentioned, David, in your question about leveling the playing field, and one of the things I want to see, I don't know if it's going to happen, but this is what I would love to see. I don't see the DoD doing any kind of reimbursement because they don't have the money to be able to do a reimbursement. What I do want to see would be a tax credit. If it's small business only, cool, I don't care. I prefer that. But if it was something like a $25,000 tax credit when you get your CMMC certification done, that would be awesome. Yeah, it doesn't cover all the costs, but it's going to cover maybe half of the assessment cost. That would still make a huge benefit to small businesses, because this is obviously, the cost really doesn't adjust based on the size of your business. We do our costing based on the assessment scope. So still, a small business might be just like another business that has a small enclave, but they're still going to be at the low end of the cost. It's still a lot. So I'd love to see that. So I'll stop there.
Let me ask Chris a question. Chris, based on the discussion in that question, in the early days of CMMC, was the direction and focus more around securing the supply chain, or did the cost of compliance ever come into discussions when the earlier legislation was being drafted?
Yeah, that's in fact, I was going to answer. I was going to speak right after Kelly in regards to trying to provide some fidelity in regards to what David was saying and what I call myself still government, what we've been seeing in regards to this issue. So whenever I talk, and most people know I talk about contractors, subcontractor, manufacturer, vendors. What we're seeing is the manufacturer vendors who develop the screw, the bolt, the essential core parts that maybe go into an assembly that contains controlled unclassified information. So, one of the things that I have preached and one of the things that I consult on is not just looking at sensitive information that's government furnished information, but also looking at the contractor's information, because sometimes that proprietary information is more sensitive than the government itself. So when you look at when CMMC or before CMMC, when NIST start coming with their regulations or their security requirements, they were looking at the primes and they were looking at the subs. They really weren't concentrating on the manufacturer or the vendors. And when CMMC came in, it was looking at the whole supply chain, which was the whole big impact that we were trying to do to at least establish some type of security, what you want to say, boundary or a standard base. So there is a cost doing that, but one thing I want to say is just because the way the government is, and they advertise and they let everybody know who's buying what, all the way down to about I would say below the level 4 in regards to manufacturing, those particular contractors are vulnerable because everybody knows that they're making these particular pieces. So if you had some adversary, they're not going to go after the tier 1, tier 2. They're going to go after the tier 3, 4, and 5 entity that is making these screws and bolts and nuts and fasteners that are going into these higher assemblies. And that's where you get the vulnerability. So I look at it as, it's not only an investment to DoD, it's also investment to those smaller companies because they do not want their proprietary information to leak out. And that's what the adversary is trying to do right now. They're taking a look at those manufacturing processes and procedures. They're looking at those processing sheets. They're looking at those tolerances. This is the thing that the United States and America does great on in regards to the reliability and producibility. And that information and that technology that is contained at their lower level at the manufacturer vendor, that's the information that they're trying to get to. So, it's a give and take, but eventually, if those manufacturers pull away from DoD, it does not mean that they're no longer vulnerable to those adversaries. They're going to get the information if it's that of value. And trust me, it is that of value. Over.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Well, we've got about 10 more minutes left. I'd like to get at least 2 or 3, maybe more questions from the participants. Is there anyone that's our guest today?
Chuck, I just want to address, there is one comment in here from John that I want to address, and anybody else that has questions, if you want to come off mute as soon as I'm done talking, go for it, or if you want to throw it in the chat, go for it. But I want to address John Koenig's question on here because it talks very much to what we've been talking about. So he's asking, the cost estimates for the assessments include how many physical site visits? Very, very good question. And define small and medium-sized firm assessments. How many users or devices, locations? So very, very good questions. One, the physical site visits was a very good change, I guess you could say, based on the final rule and the CAP, the final CMMC assessment process, created what we've been asking for was some kind of a sampling process. It's not I don't know if statistical is the right word for it, but it's not rigid that you have to assess 5% of all sites or any kind of specific number. They've given us as the C3POs the flexibility to determine what we feel comfortable with, whether it's one site visit or there's 50 locations and we decide to visit 5, whatever. It's going to be up to the C3PO for that, which is great news. Depending on the company and the locations, if everything, this is the way we're looking at it, if everything is the same between 2 locations, same people, policies, the system, everything's identical, the same security's done the same way, then we don't need to look at both of them. We can assess one of them as a sampling. But if there's anything different than them, then especially when it comes to the physical security controls, then we're probably going to need to check them both. So that's one part. If let's see, okay, I see John asking to follow up on that. No sampling guidelines for choosing how many sites. So there is a guideline, and if you look at the CMMC assessment process, version 2.0, the final that came out, there's a section in there for sampling, and there's about 5 points in it. I don't have it memorized, but there's about 5 things in there that tell us as C3Os how to determine and what to look at so that we can make that decision in sampling. It doesn't give a specific calculation or percentage or anything like that, which is good. It more tells us what we need to consider when we're making that sampling decision. So feel free to take a look at that. That'll give you a good comfort level. I was really happy with it. I was thrilled. We were really nervous that they were going to come out and say, you have to assess every site, 90% of the sites, 50%, some very rigid thing that would have made it a nightmare, especially with these companies that have multiple sites, because in the quotes we're doing, travel, we're hopefully only doing 1 physical assessment, 1 travel. If all of a sudden now it's 5, 10, 20, that's going to have a huge impact on the cost. So I was very happy about that. And then John, you asked about defining kind of the small, medium-sized firm assessments and how we're looking at it. So what we look at is it's kind of a combination of how many locations, how many users, as you mentioned, users and devices are part of the assessment scope. So are we talking a small enclave of 25 people, or even like a small enterprise manufacturer, one location, 150 employee, but it's an enterprise scope? That's still, in our opinion, a small scope. If it's something like, I don't know, 500 employees and 250 of them are the enclave, if you will, that's a bigger assessment scope. So we look at that as more of the medium. So for us, it's a little bit of a judgment call when Chuck and I are working on proposals, because we're getting all this information and we're trying to decide, is this the typical assessment, which is that small? Or is there some kind of factors in there that are making us go, that's going to take more time? So yeah, I think that answered those. Hopefully that answers your questions, John.
Hey, Kelly, and what was that document you were referring to, and is that publicly available?
Yeah, it's publicly available on the CyberAB site. We call it the CAP, but it's the CMMC assessment process. And what they did with it is, I was on the groups that were helping to revamp it. They listened to us very well. The DoD said, take out anything in that is prescriptive. We want everything to be in the rule, not in this. This can't be it needs to be a guide. It can't be a prescriptive, you have to do this, 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 and this. So that helps scale it down and make it a much better document. Everybody that's read it, I've seen all kinds of comments on LinkedIn. Everyone's saying the same thing. This is way better than the original. People made acronyms about CAP that rhymed with CAP. I'll just put it that way. And it was an inside joke. So the real one, the final one, yeah, it's much better. But yeah, it's publicly available on the cyberab.org website.
John, great question. I apologize for not seeing your chat. I was just not seeing it. So thank you for raising that.
Yep,
That's what we're here
not a
for,
problem.
is to make sure. But thanks for your question, Sean. Appreciate it.
Well, we got about four minutes left. Just open forum now. If anyone, the panelists or the guests, want to ask a question or speak, Chris, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and just probably the assessors can say this, but what have you run into? Have you run into any large, medium, or what I say small assessments? And that gets back into kind of like a cost assessment. But to me, I think there's the majority of them are probably small, maybe a single enclave, maybe two enclaves, not that many mediums, and definitely you probably haven't done a large one.
I want to bring up something, Chuck. This is from a quote we just did. This is really important. We are assessing a system. We're not assessing an organization per se. The system that we're assessing is what you're going to use to protect CUI. That's going to get its own special identification number. If you have multiple systems that are different for different purposes, which we have seen now with a prospect, they have two totally separate systems that are both used for CUI for totally different purposes. That's two full assessments. Even though it's the same company, there's enough differences in there and it's two different systems. We have to assess them separately. So that's something that came up recently that was very interesting. It made me think about that could come into play too, is think about it as a system. Do you have one system or do you have potentially multiple that have CUI in it?
One more question from John. John is asking, how long after an assessment will a company receive their formal certification by DoD?
So it'll come from us as a C3PO. We're averaging right now about 29 months. No, I'm sorry. So the way it works is the week after the interview week, Nikki can talk more to this because she's the one who had to do it. I didn't have to do it. It was great, but she had to do all the hard stuff afterwards. But in that week after the interview week, we're going through and compiling all of our documentation evidence, confirming everything, solidifying everything, getting ready for that kind of final report to the OSC. Once that's done and we have that kind of final debrief with the client saying, this is the results, this is what we determined, that final out brief, if you will, that's the final point. As soon as that's done, basically for us, we knock that out, final payments made. We have the certificate as a document. We're waiting to get the actual template, but it's going to be a PDF file. We fill that out and we send that in. We have to do all the back end stuff with EMAS and all that. But from the client's perspective, you'll get that. I can't imagine it be anything more than maybe 2 weeks post. I think it would be faster than that, probably within the week after, but maybe the second week at the most, if we have to do more stuff. What's up in the air right now is how long it's going to take us to do the formatting and inputting to the CMMC EMAS system that we're just starting now to get trained on and get access to. So that's a little bit up in the air, but within 2 weeks, I can't imagine it being longer than that.
Thank you, Kelly. Well, we're about out of time, and I'd like to just again express our appreciation for everyone's attendance today. We hope you gained some valuable information from our panelists, and please reach out on email to KNC Strategic Services. Our contact information is toward the end there. We do have a
we didn't get a chance to talk about this, so we'll do the world's fastest mention. We're planning this. We're coming up with this as an idea. That's all I'm going to say. Just stay tuned. I can't even say, mark your calendars yet, but this is something that we're working on because there's a whole lot of stuff that's on the East Coast and there's not much on the West Coast. There's only a couple. So we've been looking at creating our own summit. We'll just leave it there.
And there's our contact information. Thank you, John, for that. Definitely.
Yeah, that's what we think too.